Bob Arum said, we've got to give props to Jerry Parancio for Ali and Frazier 1. Up to that point, boxers fought for a modest guarantee against the percentage of the live gate. Or if you was one of the bigger attractions in the game, a heavyweight mainly, and you was able to negotiate for a percentage of the closed circuit, you'd get some of that too. About a year before they fought, Bob Arum said he was called to Las Vegas because he was told that the governor approved Ali and Frazier. Bob had Ali and Frazier sign a contract for $300,000 apiece against 35% of the revenue. Howard Hughes, an eccentric billionaire, he put a kibosh on the fight. Maybe he was pro-war. Who knows? Now, I'm assuming Bob got the call from Las Vegas because when Ali came back to fight Quarry and Bonavina, he wouldn't have been allowed to fight in all states. Only certain states approved him to fight. Ali was coming back from losing his license and boycotting the Vietnam War. There was a lot of sections of America who weren't happy with his decision, so he couldn't just fight anywhere. After Ali beat Jerry Quarry, Herbert Muhammad, his manager, told Bob Arum to start Top Rank Promotions, 1970. By this time, Ali was licensed to fight in New York, and he fought Oscar Bonavina at the MSG. So now Bob's saying they promoted the Oscar Bonavina fight that was in the MSG, but it doesn't come up in any of the suggestions when I'm browsing. But maybe that's true. They co-promoted it with Jerry Parencio, I'm assuming, but Jerry was the main promoter. Ali rallies late after being hurt badly by Oscar Bonavina and given all the trouble he can handle and stops him in the 15th. So he's beat the number 1 and 2 contenders on his comeback, and it's all about Ali versus Frazier. Jerry Parencio comes up with an offer, an astronomical offer at that time, $2.5 million apiece for Ali and Frazier. Now Bob, being a lawyer, he knew a judge who wanted to give him the money so he could put the fight on, but I'm guessing Jerry Parencio had the wheels in motion already. He already offered Frazier and Ali their guarantees. Now it seems to me, even back then, Bob was cheap, because before Parencio got the winning bid of $2.5 million apiece, the MSG and the Houston Superdome offered Ali and Frazier $1.25 million apiece. So Bob is way behind with this $350,000 guarantee. Way behind everybody. The lowest bid. Now, at this time, Bob would put fights on closed circuit, which is basically cinema. And he was thinking of maybe charging $5, $10 for Ali versus Frazier. Jerry Parencio flipped it on his head and charged $25 and made a fortune. He died the other year, a billionaire. He opened a Spanish TV station from the proceeds from the Ali and Frazier fight and made a fortune. Parencio, who had his grind on full charge, wanted to charge $500 a seat at the MSG. Joe Frazier and Yank Durham were very loyal to the MSG. They insisted the fight took place there. This guy, Parencio, wanted to charge $500 a seat. Bob Arum said that's the equivalent today of $5,000 a seat. Harry Marks, who I don't know what his position in Madison Square Garden was, he said absolutely not. $100 per seat is the most you can charge the punters. And the top-ranked matchmaker, Teddy Brenner, he came to a resolution with Jerry Parencio, the MSG, that they could charge $150 a seat. Arum said he had around 6 tickets, the best seats in the MSG, the high-rise seats, right at ringside, and he was being offered $2,500 a ticket. $2,500 a ticket. Ali was 29 years of age and Frazier was 27. 2 black men in the height of a war in Vietnam, and let's face it, they was in a bit of a war in America, if we're talking about racial injustice. Ali was hated by conservative white America, and there was also a lot of blacks who didn't like Ali. They didn't think he knew his place. They didn't like the Nation of Islam, and they didn't like the fact that he took a stance against the war. Jackie Robinson, the great baseball player. He was against Ali taking a stance against the war. Joe Frazier, however, he was more in line with white conservative sentiment about Ali and the war, and he was saying stuff like, I don't see why he don't go out there. It's not like they're going to give him a gun to go on the front line. He just has to box a few exhibitions and do what he has to do. It's no big deal. He was of that opinion. This is where a lot of the tensions between the two men, in terms of Ali calling Joe and Uncle Tom and a sellout, this is where that started. Joe felt slighted by Ali's comments because while Ali had his license taken away, Joe either lent or gave Ali several $1,000s to help tide him through till he could get back his license and they could make their super fight and make a whole load of money together. And then when he heard Ali calling him whatever he was calling him, it really hurt Joe. A rift that never really fully healed. In 1964, Ali actually failed a test to be enlisted into the US Army. It's rumored that Ali had dyslexia and he couldn't pass the aptitude test. With the escalation of the Vietnam War, the test standards were lowered, and in November 1965, Ali was reclassified as a 1A, eligible to fight in the war. February 1966. This was the year that he made the declaration that he didn't have no problem with no Viet Cong. A conscientious objector. War is against the teachings of the Holy Quran. I'm not trying to dodge the draft. We are supposed to take part in no wars unless declared by Allah or the Messenger. Would have been Elijah Muhammad. We are not the aggressor, but we will defend ourselves if attacked. Now, I've never read any of Joe Frazier's autobiographies, but it depends on what accounts you want to believe. Joe either attempted to join the army 4 times and was refused on the grounds that he was married with kids. If you had a wife and children to look after, you could get out of the draft back then. I don't think it's so easy now. The other story is that Joe said if they called him to fight, he would ask no questions and he would be proud to fight for his country. Ali was married to Sonji Roy between 1964 and 1967, but they didn't have any children. If you were married with kids at that time, you couldn't be drafted. After a 2-day trial in the summer of 1967, they took Ali's license away. In 1968, Joe Frazier took the New York State Athletic Commission title from Buster Mathis, stopping Buster in 11 rounds. Now, this title had been inactive since 1938, when Joe Louis knocked out Max Schmeling. But this gave Joe a claim to the world title in Ali's absence. The other man to lay claim to the title was Ali's chief sparring partner, Jimmy Ellis. He won the WBA's elimination tournament in Ali's absence. TKO'd Leotis Martin, outpointed Oscar Bonavina, and in the final, he outpointed Jerry Quarry. The WBC, in Ali's absence, they chose to lay dormant for a few years. Ellis, really a natural middleweight, was no match for Joe Frazier when everything was on the line. The WBA title, the New York State Athletic Commission title, and the WBC title. Ellis was stopped in 4 rounds. It was brutal. This is the last time we see the New York State Athletic Commission title. So, Joe Frazier is undisputed champion, but he's not the people's champion. England do not recognize Joe Frazier as world heavyweight champion. In their eyes, we're talking about the British Boxing Board of Control. Ali is still world champion as he never lost the belts in the ring. His titles were taken away via politics. Not PEDs or anything like that, or him not wanting to fight. Politics. They had to move fast to get this fight done because Ali still had to make an appeal with the Supreme Court for them to accept that he was a conscientious objector. If this bid failed, he would go to jail. So March the 8th was the earliest date that they could get the fight done at the MSG, Madison Square Garden. As I told you guys previously, a lot of the big fights back then didn't take place on a Saturday. Yeah? This fight took place on a Monday. Monday the 8th of March, 1971. MSG sold out long time ago. Long time ago. They could have sold it out over 20 times is what they said. Burt Lancaster, legendary actor, and Hall of Fame ATG, former light heavyweight champion Archie Moore, were co-commentators alongside the main announcer Don Dunphy. The businessmen, the high rollers, just regular folk, street dudes, dressed up in their, no offense meant, but their blaxploitation gear, the furs, and some fine looking women were all up in the MSG that day. This is the archetype super fight. And let's make no mistake about that. Yes, there's been big fights before Ali and Frazier. They were doing the closed circuit thing from the 60s in America. How do you think Bob Arum got in the game? By trade, Arum is a lawyer. But in the early 60s, he worked in the US Attorney's Office. One of his cases was against a boxing promoter named Roy Cohn, who in 1962 was promoting Floyd Patterson's heavyweight title defense against Sonny Liston. Now, there were some money laundering attempts by Roy Cohn with Floyd Patterson's purse, and Bob had to seize the gate revenue and the closed circuit revenue. And the more he became immersed into the murky waters of boxing, he realized he could make more money there than in the Justice Department. Now, the fight itself was a nip and tuck affair. Ali was hurt in the 3rd, in the 11th, floored in the 15th. Frazier was bleeding from the 3rd. His eye was busted up really bad. His face was in a state. He was sick on his stool after the fight finished. The right side of Ali's face was swollen up, but he wasn't marked up like Frazier. The fight was scored on a rounds basis where you don't score 10-8 or 10-9. You just give the number of rounds that are won by each individual boxer. So Frazier won by scores of 6-8, 1 even, 6-9, 4-11. He scored a knockdown in the 15th, but being the fight was scored on the round system, he didn't get no extra points. The 10-point must system, he would have got a 10-8 round. Ali languished on the ropes a little too much, was playing around a little too much, but he did put a lot of work in and he threw hands on Frazier. But Frazier dug them left hooks into the body, kept coming forward, kept working. He shot his load after the knockdown, and he himself was holding on, a sight you rarely see from Joe Frazier. He was exhausted. Post-fight, at a press conference, Frazier was waiting for Ali, and he wanted an apology for all the name-calling and all the stuff he said about Joe. But Ali was rushed off to hospital to check that swollen jaw. There was no breakage there or anything like that. He checked in and checked out of hospital. Frazier, however, was hospitalized later after the press conference. Extreme fatigue, high blood pressure. The doctor tried to say it was not related to the fight. There was rumors that he was dead, but he wasn't. He was hospitalized for a week until his blood pressure started regulating itself at a normal level. Then he was released. He was in bad shape. Diana Ross was in Ali's dressing room post-fight, holding onto his calf. She was distressed. There was people still in the arena 40 to 50 minutes after the action had finished, arguing who was the better fighter, discussing talking points on a legendary fight. I once pointed it out in a video that this was actually Joe Frazier's last great victory in boxing. After the war with Ali, Yankee Durham decided to match him relatively light against the likes of Terry Daniels and Ron Stander. And then in 1973, in Kingston, Jamaica, Joe Frazier took the beating of his life from George Foreman. Really took a heavy beating. The fight went 2 rounds. Joe came back later that year, took on Joe Bugner in Earl's Court, London. It was a 12-rounder. It went the distance. Bugner went down in the 10th. But Frazier didn't look the same. Clearly, he was losing a step. He lost the rematch to Muhammad Ali in the MSG. Once again, the round system. Ali won 5-4, 1 even, 4-7. 1 even, and 4-8. Ali employed a lot of clutching and holding tactics. In the second round, he hurt Frazier and was teeing off Tony Perez. For whatever reason, got in between the two fighters and let Frazier off the hook. Ali, he won well, but it wasn't one of his more distinguishable moments. Joe loses for the second time in his career. Once again, Yankee Durham matched Joe with relative caution, taking on Jerry Quarry and Jimmy Ellis, 2 fighters he already had stopped, and he stopped both of them again. And then came the Thriller in Manila in 1975, another classic super fight promoted by Don King. This was in the Philippines. After avenging his first professional loss to Frazier, Ali got his titles back in a massive upset against George Foreman. Massive. A year later, he enters the rubber match with Frazier, defending his title. The arena was steaming hot, and both men were near death's door. Now, Ali fans won't like to hear this, but Ali, he held excessively in the second fight against Joe Frazier. So, while Tony Perez let him get away with that, Carlos Padilla, who was the referee for the Thriller in Manila, was told to not let Ali hold excessively. And when Carlos kept warning Ali, stop holding, he was back in the trenches with Joe like the first fight. This fight was even crazier than the first fight. If you think the first fight was crazy, go watch that one. Eddie Futch pulled Frazier out before the start of the 15th round. Frazier basically couldn't see. He fought for long periods of his career legally blind in his left eye, and Ali's hand was raised. After this fight, both men had very little in the tank. Frazier never won a fight again. While I'm recording this, I'm thinking to myself, it's a super fight between 2 legendary fighters, but not many people have Joe Frazier in their top 10 heavyweights. That's the truth. It's also a super fight because it pitted 2 masterminds against each other. You had Angelo Dundee, Ali's coach, against Eddie Futch, Joe Frazier's coach. So where does Frazier go from here? He rematched George Foreman in Nassau Coliseum. Joe was rocking the bald head. He lasted into the 5th, 3 rounds more than the first fight, but it was one-sided and brutal, like the first fight. And he made an ill-advised comeback 5 years later against Floyd Jumbo Cummings, a muscular inmate boxer who was very powerful, nearly knocked out Frank Bruno, and he escaped with a majority draw. So he never had a big win again after the Ali fight, some 10 years in between the first Ali fight and Floyd Jumbo Cummings. Now, after Ali won the title back from George Foreman, I believe alongside Floyd Patterson, he was the second man to become a 2-time heavyweight champion. In the last phase of his career after the Thriller in Manila, he took the ill-advised fight against Ernie Shavers. He promised Ernie a title shot if he beat Roy Williams, and Ali was true to his word. Lost and won the title from Leon Spinks to become the first man to win the world title 3 times. The last 2 fights were losses to Larry Holmes and Trevor Burbick. Probably goes down in history with the best heavyweight resume ever, in all truth. You could argue that the combatants that fought for the coloured heavyweight championship, like Sam Lankford, Jack Johnson, Harry Wills, Sam McVeigh, etc., had more extensive resumes. They just weren't allowed to compete for the mainstream heavyweight title at that time. But, you got to put Ali in the shake-up, possibly the greatest heavyweight of all time. Joe Frazier made a great dance partner, however. It's a shame with some of the fighters of yesteryear, not just the black ones, but guys like Harry Greb and of course Sam Lankford and Jack Johnson and the rest, is there's limited footage of them fighting, while we have the whole of the 3-fight series with Joe Frazier and Ali on many VHS tapes online, on DVD, on many formats. We have it here, and this is its 50th anniversary. There's some great trilogies in boxing, some rivalries going into 4 or 5 fights or even more. Tony Zell and Rocky Graziano, a middleweight, they fought 3 times. But I think there's only one full fight online and little bits and pieces of the other two. Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta fought 6 times. Ray won 5 of them, but there's only footage of one of them fights, and that's the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But Ali and Frazier, they put boxing on the map with that super fight. On the map. It will never be forgotten. You know, the whole Vietnam narrative that ran simultaneously with the build-up for the fight. Ali was a pariah to a lot of conservative white America. And then as the fight was approaching and coming closer, there was a divide and shift that started appearing where Ali was becoming a hero, not just to black people or Vietnamese people, but to white people who didn't agree with the war. They didn't agree with it. Some people say Ali went over the top with the disparaging comments about Joe Frazier as a black man. Joe grew up as a sharecropper in South Carolina in the 40s. Abject poverty is what he grew up in. He moved out and headed off to Philly when he was very, very young. Ali didn't have it as tough as Joe. He didn't. Once again, the Ali sympathizers will say Ali was just trying to sell the fight. But like Joe Frazier said, Jerry Parenchio already gave them the guarantees. The 2.5 guarantees. That was already locked down. They didn't have to sell the gate. But that was just Ali. Ali wasn't really trying to sell the gate. And you can say it was gamesmanship. Maybe he had genuine concern with Frazier's aggressive style. And he thought he needed to play extra mind games. When Frazier prayed in the dressing room before going into the ring in the first fight, it was his son telling the story. He said, "What did you say in the prayer, Dad?" And he said, he prayed to God that he can kill this man because he's not righteous. Talking about Ali. They did kind of patch it up before both of them died. But I don't think Joe ever got over it totally. Nevertheless, they will be connected to each other for as long as they keep records on sporting achievement in this world.